Estate Weekly. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Monday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific time, and we talk about all things related to trusts, estates, probates, intestate succession, all of those interesting subjects, both from the standpoint of your own estate planning as well as professionals who either are already in that arena or are maybe looking to enter into it to expand their business, or they're looking for a different niche to get into. And I can tell you, for example, here in California, there's a huge need for professionals who can administrate trusts and estates. We've got literally trillions of dollars that need to change hands in the next 10 years, and only about 7,000 or 8,000 professionals who can administrate trusts, most of whom are over 55 years of age. So I'm very excited this morning, it's morning here. I'm very excited that I have a guest today, Michael Zwick. And it turns out Michael is a frequent guest in my friend Bill Gross's show, which is also on probate issues. So doubly excited to have him here. He's slumming a little bit coming over here because Bill has such a huge audience. But he's
You're
great.
much better dressed than Bill. Don't tell him I said that.
I won't. He would acknowledge it though. It's it was the way I was raised. I don't want to shame my mother. And so I want to jump right into talking to Mike. Mike is Mike or Michael. I should ask you is.
Either one, doesn't matter.
Okay, so Michael is known as the Inheritance Investigator. And I guess maybe you should have one of those, Sherlock Holmes hats on or something. But Michael, why don't let's just jump right in. Talk to us about what it is you do and why it is such an important aspect of the whole estate administration and probate process.
Sure, Kevin. First of all, great to be here. So I'm an attorney turned private investigator. I don't wear one of those hats. I don't wear Hawaiian shirts like Thomas Magnum. What I do is I work specifically in the probate field, finding missing heirs and inheritance assets. So we're here to help executors and trustees and their attorneys where they have a case where either they don't know who the heirs are, or they know who the heirs are, but they can't find them. Or in some cases where the decedent has taken to the grave the information of what he or she owned, and we'll step in and we'll do what we can to find those assets and get them turned over to the heirs.
And how often are you finding that these issues crop up? I was mentioning before we started, I have a situation, where a fellow unexpectedly died intestate, and it's going to be a challenge, finding all this stuff, getting it all. We know some things because he had a business, but how often do you find that, an estate or is missing this kind of vital information?
It doesn't happen that often, but when it does happen, it's a big headache and can really slow things down. When it comes to finding missing heirs, for example, some states are pretty lax in terms of just proceeding and taking the shares of those missing heirs and putting in with a county treasurer to hold for the people. Mm-hmm. But other states, it can really slow down the process, add months and months to the process before you can even go through with, start the process of getting appointed as an executor and stuff like that. So it really depends. To find the assets, obviously, again, it doesn't happen super often, but when it does, that's a big issue. And sometimes we do it where the executors could find the information themselves, but it's difficult. You alluded to before how professional fiduciaries in California are starting to age out of the profession. Mm-hmm. People who are non-professionals who are handling for a family tend to be in what's called the sandwich generation. The executors tend to be the children of the deceased, with the average death or age of death of a deceased being somewhere between 75 and early 80s. That means the children are going to be often in their 30s to 50s. Those people generally have jobs or businesses to run. They have families, their own kids, and they're just very stressed out by everything going on in life to begin with. And they've lost a loved one. And now you're piling on top of that the role of being an executor, and that can be really challenging. So what we strive to do is to take some of those headaches off of their plate.
Mm-hmm. And what? Let's say that an executor, or an administrator proceeds without having a clear picture as to whether all of the heirs have been identified, have been notified. What could be the consequences of that with respect to, the administration of the estate?
So like I said, that can really slow down the process. In some states, before you proceed, the court might say, we want to see that you've done everything you can to find and identify, or identify and then find all the heirs.
Mm-hmm.
So that, first of all, can become much more expensive if you don't find them. But also, court might say, we're not proceeding with this until we make sure we have everybody who's a party to the case involved, so that they can have notice that someone has filed a petition and wants the will admitted and wants to be the executor. So it can really slow things down. And meanwhile, nobody's getting their inheritance until it all gets ironed out. So it really can create a big headache and a big time suck for everybody involved.
Yeah, I mean, in California, as I recall, there is a notice requirement to all the heirs. And now, so how would someone know if all the heirs hadn't been identified? What would be?
Well, when someone files a petition for probate, they are, first of all, signing under penalty of perjury.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to, and they also have to list on there who all the heirs are, or who all the, or if there's a will, who all the devisees are. So they have an obligation to list everybody and their contact information. It's pretty standard in pretty much every state in the country. Right. Is there's an obligation to list whoever all the interested parties are and their addresses. Mm-hmm. So yes, there are cases where somebody says they leave somebody out. Sometimes just laziness. More often, it's a matter of greed or righteous indignation. We've seen cases where someone will say, will not list someone because they didn't think that person deserved to inherit. But that's not their call. The law is what the law is. The law very clearly defines who is an interested party for probate case, who's an heir, and you have to follow that.
Right. So let's switch over now to the asset side, because you mentioned you also do asset searches. So what kind of situations does that arise in terms of, someone would engage you because why? They have a relative who's died, but
usually it's going to happen where the deceased did not just share information, often lived alone. Recent case we had out of New York City involved an individual who had divorced his wife, had a long-term girlfriend, but they did not live together, didn't have the closest relationship with his two adult children. And when he passed away and the family went into the house, there was not a scrap of paper, no bills, nothing. He did everything digitally. Mm-hmm. But he was but he didn't share the information for the login information, stuff like that. They knew he was involved in Bitcoin and stuff like that, or, in cryptocurrency. So they turned to us, like, can you find assets? So we were able to dig in and find the crypto. We found, actually, he had lived in Detroit for a few years. So we found the storage unit that he owned, and we went in there, found some stuff. We found some bank accounts where he worked for the city of New York for a while. So we were able to discover a pension. So typically when someone comes to us, when they don't know what the person owned, we'll do an investigation. We'll do an interview and say, tell us about the person. Where did he or she work? Where did he or she live? Stuff like that. That gives us a profile as to who the person was. And then we can leverage our years of experience we can't promise that we are going to be thorough and totally thorough. We'll be as thorough as possible, but there's no magic database that we can search. There are thousands of banks and however many pension fund, not pension fund, but brokerage firms and insurance companies. So we can do the best we can. Doesn't mean that things won't fall through the cracks later, or they'll later surface, but we can only do the best we can.
So I want to take just a little bit of a digression for a minute. You mentioned looking for crypto assets. So my understanding is if one doesn't have the passwords with which a crypto account was established, you can't get into the blockchain and all of that. So would you talk a little bit about that class of assets? Because I suspect it's going to become more frequent over time, and yet it would seem to be a different set of problems, if you will, than say, a bank account where, they're heavily regulated. And so, banks have to keep records, et cetera.
So in this case, the gentleman left behind a laptop computer. So we turned it over to our IT people to crack into, and they were able to get in. It turns out that this gentleman had accounts with two respected crypto investment platforms, Robinhood, and I can't remember the other one off the top of my head. Mm-hmm. So they were actually very reputable companies that we were able to actually get somebody on the phone, and we were able to give them other information to get into the accounts. But yes, there are some platforms where it's you either have that however many character chain, or you don't, and if you don't, you're out of luck. So that's fortunately we haven't run into that yet. But yes, I do see that being a problem. I know I attended an estate planning seminar probably about 2 years ago about crypto and estate planning, and the one takeaway was, you better leave behind that key for somebody, because if you don't, that money might just disappear and you'll never be seen again.
Wow. So in a case like this, and there's kind of two parts to it. One is, going into the computer, and the other is, getting in touch with the crypto, companies. Do you have to go and get court approval to do that? How does that process work?
So typically, there's someone has been appointed as the executor or the estate, or as the trustee, and then that person will have given us a power of attorney. We have to obviously prove, first of all, we document everything. So we have to show that A, the owner is dead, B, that there's an executor that has been appointed by the court, or there's a trustee, and C, that we have power of attorney to act on their behalf.
Okay. So there's a whole document trail, in other words, that gives you the authority you need in order to do it.
Yeah, and that's not just with a crypto. That's with anybody. That's with a bank, or sometimes if our client is the heir but has not been appointed yet, then we might have to document the relationship. So, for example, if the client is the daughter, we might need her birth certificate, or if she's listed, for example, on the death certificate as the informant. If you're just to kind of back up for those who are not familiar, on every death certificate, there's a slew of information about the deceased, of where he or she was born, on what date, parents' names, education level, served in the military, whatever. That usually comes from an informant. The informant typically is a family member. Mm-hmm. So if the informant is also the person who's hiring us, most places will, and we'll explain to them the probates in process, but it's going to take a while. Most organizations will still deal with us at that point.
Gotcha. So in some cases, and I've dealt with this a couple of times, while the person left a pretty robust estate plan, they had a trust and, wills and everything. And yet we found that there was still missing property because either they lost track of it. And like in one case, for example, I found it through the state had a sort of not
property.
missing property, but like an abandoned property, register. So what do you think about, routinely having you or someone like you do a search for assets that, for whatever reason may have fallen through the cracks?
So that's something we do, and it's something I would recommend to every executor or trustee do, is both when you're starting the process and also before you wrap things up, check the state unclaimed property division. And so that's my original foray into being a private investigator, was dealing with unclaimed property. We still do a lot of that work. And money does pop up there. It can be sometimes decades after someone passes away. So, and it's not anybody's fault. Sometimes it's the person forgot that he or she bought a life insurance policy decades ago. Whatever. There could be a variety of reasons why. Some of the person didn't even know they own the asset. We've had a number of times where person A opened up a bank account and listed person B as the beneficiary upon death, but didn't tell person B that. So person A died however many years ago. Person B became the beneficiary of this account, but never even knew that he or she owned it, and meanwhile passed away. So it's something I would recommend that everybody should do when handling an estate, is to check the unclaimed property division for every state where the deceased lived, even if it was 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Okay, so every state where they lived. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, because unclaimed property is supposed to be reported to the state of the last known address that the holder of the asset has on file. So, for example, I moved from Michigan to Florida a little over 3 years ago, and it is possible that 5 years from now, Michigan they have my Michigan address still, and they owed me unclaimed property, owed me something. They turn over to Michigan unclaimed property.
Okay, got it. Going back to the heirs side of things, I'm not exactly sure how to ask this question. So let's say, the decedent, he's gone now, and maybe he had a couple of children. Those children turned out to maybe predeceased him. And so now, are there grandchildren around? Are there, parents, uncles, cousins? I mean, how deep into the search for heirs do you go when presented with that particular situation?
So, first of all, we go as deep as we have to go till we find the people, but also within state law. So different states have different limits on how far someone is, how far in the family tree someone is to be an heir. In most states, it's the descendants of the deceased grandchildren. So we're talking first cousins and their descendants. But some states might say it's the descendants of the great grandparents. So we're talking second cousins and their descendants. And some states say that after a certain point, I believe California is like this, that initially that's who the heirs are. But if there's nobody within that, it's basically however far distant somebody might be related, if they're the closest one, they get to inherit it.
Okay, so really you'll look at the laws of descent and distribution for each state and figure that out. Now, in that case, if someone has lived in multiple states, do you have to deal with multiple sets of state laws in determining heirs, or how?
No, it's the jurisdiction over someone's estate is the state where the person last lived. with the intention of, I mean, if someone, for example, moved to another state just to live in a nursing home and lived there for the last number of months or even years, but never really thought of that as their home, then it would go back to where they actually lived.
Okay. And generally speaking, will the state be the state in which the estate is being probated or being administrated? Is that how it works? In other words,
well, like I said, the state is going to be where the person last lived, and in the county where the person last lived. The one exception to that is if the person owns real estate, any sort of real property, whether it's a house or even like mineral interests or easements or whatever, they might have to have a second estate open. So if you have someone who's, for example, a snowbird and lives in Michigan but owned a house in Arizona, and passed away and didn't have everything in a trust, there would be the main estate would be open in Michigan, and there would be what's called an ancillary estate open in Arizona, just to deal with the house. Now on that Arizona thing, if Arizona's laws are different in terms of who inherits versus Michigan, then so you might have different inheritance of that house in Arizona versus who inherits the rest of the stuff back in Michigan.
Okay. Great. So that answered the follow-up question I had. Okay. So let me ask you this, kind of going a little bit farther afield. What happens if you've got, so I have a friend who, she, as far as I know, lived in Los Angeles her entire adult life, but her father lived in, I believe it was British Columbia, and he was a Canadian citizen. He had property there. He had property in Arizona. So in a sort of cross international border situation, how do you handle, how do you handle an investigation, whether it be for heirs or whether it be for assets, or do, like, maybe I should ask, do you, and if so, how do you handle that?
So we do handle stuff outside of U.S. What's what are called assets international. So in terms of how it would go, for example, your example, where I'm guessing the father lived in British Columbia when he passed away.
Yes.
So British Columbia law would govern all the assets except for the real property that he or she owns, or that he owns here in the States. So yeah, I think I don't know Canadian intestacy law too much, but my guess is it's probably pretty similar to the U.S. to what is, and like I said, what's in the U.S. every state has their own probate law. Now they tend to be fairly similar. Some of the differences you might find, though, are on the splitting of who gets what if the person left the spouse and children. In some states, the surviving spouse gets half or a certain percentage. Some states, like in Michigan, where I'm from, if the person didn't leave a will, the surviving spouse gets the first, I think, $150,000 of the estate, and then it gets split between the spouse and the children. So it really just has to look at the law for various assets, or where the jurisdiction is. Gotcha.
And do you do work south of the border as well, Mexico and such, or?
Yes, so we do. So most of the stuff that takes out of the country is more the missing heir stuff than the asset searches.
Okay. And the answer to this may be no, but as privacy laws and such change and develop, how does that impact your work and your ability to serve your clients?
So one of the benefits of my background is that I and other members of my staff are attorneys, so we are able to look at the laws and stuff like that. It's ever changing in terms of what access we can get for documents, and we have to just kind of roll with it in terms of the laws changing. Sometimes sometimes those laws changing could put up a brick wall where we can't find any heirs because we just can't get the next piece of information that is the building block for our work. So it really depends. And also U.S. actually has fairly open records laws as opposed to many other countries. So that does impact our work to go internationally. If we find out that a missing heir lived in Cuba, that's usually going to be a brick wall. We can't go any further because they're getting information, but also transacting business with someone in Cuba, them being able to receive money is an issue. Same thing with, say, North Korea or some other countries. Other countries, though, have much more open records laws and much more free in terms of communications.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, and I had a follow-up question on that, and now I think I've lost it. Oh, yes. So, generally speaking, are you working in your capacity as a lawyer, and therefore you're able to offer, attorney-client privilege? Would you speak a little bit about that aspect of it, since you said you're all lawyers? So
we all have law degrees and are members of state bars, but no, we do not practice law. We are a private investigation agency. We do offer our clients the utmost confidentiality. It's never been an issue where we've been attacked, where we've been subpoenaed to give over records or to challenge it. So that's never been an issue for us. We do not have the legal protection, or clients don't have legal protection of attorney-client privilege with us.
Okay. And I remember from my days when I did expert witness work, I had a real estate company prior to actually being in the Navy. And one of the things when I was contacted to do some work is I would ask, especially if I was dealing with the principal, do you want to engage me directly, or do you want to have your lawyer engage me? Because then what I do is the work product of the lawyer, and the lawyer
Right.
can hold it, right, essentially undiscoverable, or at least within certain limits. How does that issue ever play into the work that you do, and if so, how do you handle that?
That's never really been an issue for us. When we're doing asset searches, we're usually working where everyone is in the same direction. We don't get involved in disputes over who gets the inheritance, or misappropriation by a trustee or an executor. We do not get involved in that. What we get involved, one of the first things I ask someone when they call us to do an investigation is everybody getting along? We are not interested in getting involved in a dispute between heirs. We're just dealing with the one person that everybody has decided will be the representative for the family or for the estate. And in terms of missing heirs, no, we find the heirs, we bring them in. So we're actually, in those cases, we're not retained by the estate. We're not retained by the executor or the trustee. We are simply, we refer the matter by them, and then we find the missing heir or heirs, bring them in, and we actually get paid by them. We work on a contingency basis where we get paid by them to bring them in, basically in a very simplified form. Just say, for example, Kevin, someone says, find this Kevin Bemmel, and we find you. We say, Kevin, great news. We found money for you in exchange for a percentage. We'll tell you where it is, and we'll get it for you. That's the very simplistic way of how we present it to you. And then if you sign with us, we would then bring you in. We would present you to the trustee or the executor or the court if necessary, and say, this is not only Kevin Bemmel, this is the correct Kevin Bemmel. We want to obviously everybody wants to make sure that they're paying out the right person. And then when you receive your payout from the estate or trust, you would then give us a percentage of what you got.
Oh, interesting. So in that case, yeah, the heir is actually the one who's engaged you, and wow, very, very interesting. I mean, it does make sense because your interests and that of the heir are aligned, and so
right. So there are some firms that do find missing heirs that are hired by the estate or the trust, and they work on an hourly basis, and they just prepare a written report. There's two different business models. We just happen to like the one we have.
Right. Very good. Well, unfortunately, our time is up. I'm glancing up here in the corner where I have a clock, but this was really fascinating. It's an area, candidly, that I have not had much involvement with in my practice, but I can see that there's a great deal here, and people really need to know about what you're doing. And you did mention you practice in all 50 states.
Yes.
And do you have to be licensed as an investigator in all the states, or how? I'm just curious how that works.
In terms of doing that, for unclaimed property stuff, we do in some states, not everywhere, because you only have to be licensed if you have a physical presence in a state.
Oh, okay.
If I were to go to a state to do actual on the ground investigation, then I would have to either be licensed or affiliate with or work under the license of somebody else.
Oh, okay.
It's not an issue. We have more than enough licenses.
Okay.
And more than enough times throughout the year that we have to renew those licenses and fill out whatever paperwork. So
Right.
not like to take out any more than we have to.
Yes, as someone who carries a number of licenses himself, I can certainly appreciate that. I do have to mention that I'm a big fan of radio detective shows. Mostly they're from the 30s through the 50s, maybe very early 60s, but there was never Michael Zwick, Inheritance Investigator. So, someday you may have a second career documenting, true cases of inheritance investigation. It could be quite fun, I imagine.
I've thought of writing a book or two if I ever have the free time.
Yeah. Well, so those may be best shared over, bourbon or, a nice glass of wine, but
Exactly.
We'll have to talk about those offline. Well, Michael, thank you very much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I'm sure the viewers and listeners got a tremendous amount out of it. I'm going to have you hang tight while I wrap things up and go offline.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So folks, thanks very much for tuning in today. Michael, I'm going to put your contact information in the show notes. So if people want to get in touch with you for more information, or they've got a case for you to handle, they'll be able to do that. Folks, just look down below where you're viewing this on YouTube, or if you're viewing it on any of our social media channels. Michael's contact information will be there, and I'm sure he's happy to have him or one of his staff speak to you about your matter and see if it's something they can help you out with. So thanks for joining me. Just a quick reminder, tomorrow at 10 a.m. is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. And then on Wednesday at 10 a.m., these are all Pacific time, is People Making Money. So thanks for tuning in. Look forward to seeing you later this week. Y'all have a great rest of the day.